Last week, I started working on this action combat Gladiator game for the Playdate. I managed to finish the player movement and attack states, which include a run, a 2-hit attack, a roll, and a slide attack. I also experimented with adding these parallax columns in the back, but after asking for feedback, I got a bunch of comments about how I should change them. So what I ended up doing was getting this ocean sky background from the Sunnyland asset pack and running it through a dithering algorithm. I set that as a static background instead, as well as spacing out the columns more. Now it looks like you're outside and it's much more readable. I took it to Twitter to see what people thought, and people seem to like it. I think I'll eventually have it so there's different areas in the game, so I can switch out the background in that case. Last week, I added some hurtboxes to the player model, so my next task was to make some hitboxes for the player attacks. I wrote a bit of code to allow me to create any arbitrary size hitbox and offset it from the player's position, and also to delay when the hitbox gets created and how long it lasts. I can precisely time it to the attack. I made the hitboxes a little bigger than what the swing looks like, so the player doesn't feel cheated out of a missed attack. The main task for this week was to add an enemy, so I added a simple health bar to facilitate combat. It's nothing special, just doing what I've always done, drawing a rounded rectangle into a sprite. Doesn't look that great, but it's just a temporary one for now. I really like the asset pack that I used to get the night animations, so I went back and bought another asset pack from them that had a bunch of different enemy types. I'll be adding them all eventually, but I picked out the wolf as my first enemy. I ran it through the dithering algorithm again with high contrast to get these nice 1-bit animations. I wanted the wolf to be able to have an idle patrolling state, like in many other games, and my first attempt at it didn't seem quite right, but I eventually got it working. Like for the player, I'm using the animated sprite library and have this big ugly state machine that handles all the state management and transitions. The wolf waits idle for a random amount of time and runs back and forth, patrolling the area. I then added in an attack state, where if you're within the wolf's detection range, it runs at you. Then, if you're within the attack range, it attacks you. But if you're outside of the detection range, it goes back to the patrolling state. However, you might notice that when the wolf is near, it just continuously attacks, which seems a bit unfair. So I went ahead and added a short attack cooldown, which I like much better. I can adjust the detection range, and I thought it looked adorable when I set the detection range really high and the wolf chases after you. It really made me want to add some sort of pet system to the game, but if I did all the stuff I wanted to do, I don't think I'd ever finish the game. Maybe next time. You need to be able to actually hit the wolf, so I added a hurtbox to its model. Unlike the player, the size and the position of the wolf doesn't change all that much, so the hurtbox stays consistent in all the different states. Then I made it so when you hit the wolves, they would get a little bit of hit stun and flash white momentarily. Lastly, I added a bit of knockback to your attacks as well. I already had a simple physics system in place for the running, acceleration, and friction, so it was just a matter of giving the wolf some velocity opposite of the player. It was feeling pretty good, so it was time to add a death state to the wolf. I hooked up a health system, and the wolf plays a death animation and then disappears. The wolf suddenly disappearing was pretty weird, so I added a fade effect, which I did by just using the built-in faded image method. My last task was to give a wolf a hitbox on its attack, so the player can now take damage. It's just a small, short hitbox, as opposed to the player having a big, oversized hitbox, to make sure the player doesn't feel like they get hit when they shouldn't have. If you want to play the game in this early version, or see the source code, Patreon supporters get access to both. If you didn't catch last week's episode, you can watch it here. See you next week.